Hey students, it's Miss Schmidt. I apologize I'm not at school today. I'd intended on being there, but circumstances dictated otherwise. So you're going to go through and listen to this lecture. It's a longer lecture, and it has really important information. This is the information that forms the basis of the rest of this unit. So go through. If you have notes, make sure that you're asking me questions when I'm back on Tuesday. If there's any confusion about any of the area, make sure that you have that so you can ask me. The other thing is there is a clicker check after this, and it's not even really a clicker check. It's more so to make sure that you listen to the presentation. So following this, there'll be time, probably about 5 or 10 minutes, and you'll be able to go through and take that little quiz over the presentation. I apologize as you're listening. There might be some chomping in the background, and that's going to be my dogs chewing bones. But today we're going to talk about the first agricultural revolution, and it's huge. It's a really big deal, not just in AP Human Geography, but throughout all of history. First, though, to review the information that you all did last week in class, we talked about economics. So we have an entire unit on economic geography, but in agriculture, we introduce you to these terms that are associated with economic geography: primary, secondary, tertiary. They're also classified as primary, manufacturing, and services. You're going to do economic geography next. We're going to get into a lot of detail with these things, but they're really good to frame the agricultural revolutions and how they're influenced by where people are working. The activity that you did the other day, what you may not have noticed, and I know that I technically have the sheets and I'll return them, but when you get the sheets back, you can look at the information. But agriculture is a primary economic activity. So the reason why you engage in agriculture is to provide subsistence to your family. And so we'll have a special term called subsistence agriculture. It's low skill. You don't have to have much education. And countries that are developing, or countries that are in the periphery or semi-periphery, they usually have more people who are working in this particular area. If you're in a country that is more developed, it has mechanization, and that means that you have machines that are doing agricultural work. So you have less people who need to grow things to help the people survive, because a machine can do the work of multiple people. And this means that you have a surplus, and you sell this surplus. And this is going to be a different type of agriculture. It's called commercial agriculture. And the first thing we're going to talk about, though, is going to be that subsistence agriculture. So you have a machine, it creates a surplus, that surplus is sold, and that's a secondary economic activity in that you have a machine. Remember, the building of machines, manufacturing, that's secondary. And then tertiary is the service itself. So you're selling the food product, or you have markets to sell it. In developed countries, like core countries, like the United States, agriculture is still a primary economic activity, but the secondary machines and tertiary, having managers or selling those items, those play a huge role in how that item is distributed. In the activity that you did, the U.S., the last time I looked at this, had 0.7% of the population working in agriculture, but it makes up 1.6% of the GDP. The GDP is the gross domestic product. And it's a measure of how much if something is made and worth out of the entire economic picture. So the U.S. has less people in agriculture, but it makes a lot of money off of it because the GDP includes everything that's manufactured, everything that's made. And it means that it's using machines to do these things. And that means that it has a higher level of economic development. So it would be higher on Rostow's ladder of development. It would also be more of a core country or a semi-periphery country because you do have those higher levels of education going into it. In contrast to the United States, you have countries like Chad, where 80% of its labor force is in agriculture. That means a big part of its labor force is not educated. And you have these people who don't have many skills, and they're growing food, and they're using that food to survive. They're in a subsistence economy. There's limited levels of development, and then you also have a loss in production. So if you have 80% of your country that's working in agriculture, that means that you're growing a lot of food to eat, and they're not manufacturing or they're not making a lot of items. And so if a majority of your population is just trying to survive, you really don't have a lot of wiggle room to build things to sell those things, which can help boost your economy. That would get you farther in that Rostow's economic model that you looked at. So you have people who solely, that's all they do is they grow stuff and they eat stuff and they're feeding their family. It's not about trying to earn money. It's about trying to survive. And so a country like Chad, with such a high number of its population in agriculture, they're a great example of a periphery country. Hopefully, if you don't understand this, you come to me and you say, Ms. Schmidt, Tuesday, can you kind of explain this again? I'm more than happy to go over it. But the big nuance is once you have machines, it helps you produce more land per acre. And when you grow things and you eat them, it's subsistence agriculture. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're pretty much done with the economic aspect of this unit, but it helps you frame, okay, here's the type of economy or here's the type of agriculture that they're engaging in. Because agriculture will change based on your ability to produce certain things or how you extract it or plant it from the ground. We watch a lot of videos in this unit, and we spend more time on this unit because you all are from the city. And you have some schools that take this unit and they are very familiar with a lot of the concepts, whereas you're not as familiar. We do a unit on urbanization or cities, which there's a large number of students who are more rural who they struggle with some of the concepts. But don't worry, we'll spend a lot of time watching some pretty awesome farm videos. So now go way back when we talked about the demographic transition model. So remember, the demographic transition model has multiple stages where you have stage 1, which we say no countries in stage 1. And that's about hunting and gathering. And so you would only keep your population alive based on the amount of food that that person could catch pretty much on their own. Like there wasn't a lot of extra. So if grandma gets sick, she's going to die because she can't go out and catch food. She can't get the needed number of calories to keep her alive. When you have when you have peoples who go from hunting and gathering to growing things on their own, that's actually a transition from stage 1 of the agricultural revolution. That's when you're introduced to it. So you have your people who are hunting and gathering, and that's stage 1 of the demographic transition model. And then once people start planting food, that's stage 2 of the demographic transition model. That stage 2 of the demographic transition model is also known as the first agricultural revolution. And I have a little image for you. So remember, anytime I talk about numbers, and it's really important in this unit, the numbers, I can't tell you how accurate they are, like how many calories a person needs to survive, or how many calories an acre of yams will give you. But you need to understand kind of these numbers so that you get the concept of it. And so if you have people who are hunting and gathering, they're getting a limited number of calories per acre. And so imagine each square on the right side of the screen, that represents an acre. And so you have 2 people and they're trying to get at least 2,000 calories a day. And they have to be moving around, going over a larger area of land, because if you're hunting, you have to track the animal, or if you're gathering, you're picking up the natural resources that are growing. And so you need a larger area to be a hunter and gatherer. And so as they're going around, they have to go over, okay, we have 8 acres of land. And those 8 acres can sustain 2 people because those 2 people are getting about 500 calories per acre. Now, if they were getting more calories per acre, they wouldn't need as much land. But again, it's hunting and gatherings. They're not getting maybe the full potential of that acre of land. Now, it depends on the year. If it's a year where there's been drought and there isn't much stuff for them to gather, they're going to have to go wider. They might actually need to cover 10 acres or 15 acres just so they can make up their calorie content. And so it's not very stable. So that's why your population has such variation in births and deaths, that people don't have a long life expectancy. But a big part of it is going to depend on what kind of year they were having for nature in general in terms of their hunting and gathering those items. Keep remembering this. So there's no country that's in stage 1. There's still no country in stage 1 of the demographic transition model. It didn't change in these past units. There's a ton of countries that are in stage 2 of the demographic transition model. And so when we're talking about agriculture and the agricultural revolutions, because there's multiple ones, you need to know that every country has experienced the first agricultural revolution. It doesn't mean that they've experienced all of them. There's the first agricultural revolution that we're talking about today. Then we're going to talk about the second agricultural revolution. But before we talk about the second agricultural revolution, we're actually going to talk about something called the Industrial Revolution. And then there's a third agricultural revolution, which is sometimes called the Green Revolution. And for sure, not every country has gone through the third agricultural revolution. Every country has gone through the first, though. Most have gone through the second. And the third one, it varies based on the country. So please, if anything, remember that. The first agricultural revolution, it doesn't seem very exciting when you talk about it on face value, but think about this. Prior to people learning how to plant things, they constantly had to be mobile. And then once you learned how to plant things, they stopped hunting and gathering, and they could stay in a single location. For most historians, this is probably one of the most pivotal things that ever happened. And it's going to come up a lot in world history, and we're actually going to revisit this concept again when we get to cities and urban environment. So once people realized that things can grow in a cycle, that they could grow things, not just hunt and gather them, they could then plan on food. And it becomes more stable because you may or may not be able to catch a herd that is going by that has a lot of calories that can sustain you for a while. But now if you know that, hey, we can plant things and we can stay here, and we know that in 7 months' time it's going to grow 2,000 calories, we're going to be okay. And so people start hanging out and doing that. Some of the beliefs, here's the tricky thing with the first agricultural revolution. No one knows for sure how it happened. So there's a lot of hypotheses on how it occurred. One is that you have people who, they would go to an area, they would, let's say, eat seeds, or they would eat, they'd eat some type of fruit, and then they'd throw the seeds off to the side. And then when they'd come back the next year, they started to realize that where they threw all the pits of the fruit off, that started to grow plants. And over time, there was this gradual understanding that, hey, based on where we put these pits that have seeds in them, it grows a plant. The same goes for other things like potatoes and root crops. So root crops are a lot easier to grow than seed crops. And if you are someone who has had a potato that is in a dark cupboard for a long period of time, you have successfully grown a root crop because it starts to sprout. And potatoes are one of the easiest root crops to grow. And we'll talk a lot about yams. And yams are like potatoes. They're like a sweet potato, and they grow underground. These are root crops. They're the first to grow. And now that you have food on a regular basis, you can feed it to animals. And you can start to domesticate those animals. There's actually only about 500. I could be wrong. It's in your Faubourg textbook. But there's not as many animals domesticated as we usually think there are. But once we start having a regular food source, we're able to continuously feed an animal, maintain that animal, and also get that animal to kind of hang out with us, hence dogs and cats. But even being able to kind of have cattle and have that cattle fed and then use them as a beast of burden or a workable animal, that's a pretty big deal too. Okay, so on this slide, I'm still talking about the first agricultural revolution, and I've included stick figures yet again, and off to the right, you have 8 acres. I'm going through an assumption and saying that an individual needs 2,000 calories a day to survive. This is important because I keep using this image to explain other types of agriculture, because we're going to learn about how the number of calories that you can get out of each acre will influence what your population density is going to be. Remember, this whole class is about where people live and why. Food is a really big part of it. So, if you plant food, you're going to have a relatively stable amount of calories per year. Again, there's variations. It'll depend on flooding. It'll depend on drought, but you don't have to move. And what happens with the first agricultural revolution is you get a surplus. So, okay, I have 8 acres of land. I get 2,250 calories per acre. I have an extra 250 calories per acre. That means for every 8 acres of land, I can support 8 people, but then I have a surplus, and that surplus can actually support a person who doesn't have to work on the farm. This is what gives you civilization. So the last guy is going to get the surplus. And early on, you'll find that this last individual who is getting a surplus and who is not physically working on the farm to get that food, they become someone who has a specialization. A lot of times, the specialization person, they would engage in reading or writing, not so much learning them, but now they have the free time to actually be able to develop this skill. You have pottery that emerges. Pottery becomes a big deal because now you can store food, carry it over for the next year. This group of people often becomes a king class or an elite class. And this is early history. And so this population, the surplus population who's kind of doing leisure activities, a lot of them are priests or affiliated with the religion. It's not uncommon to have your kings and queens or your rulers who are also seen as gods or goddesses or spokespeople for the divine. But this is really important. You now have a surplus. You have someone who can do something else. And that person who can do something else is the person who is learning to read, to write, becomes a ruling class. This is the birth of civilization because now you have extra people. It's a big, big deal. And it doesn't sound very exciting, but just the fact that you learn how to plant something, you now can have people who stay alive, but they don't have to hunt and gather. And you can have people who live older because they're not physically able to hunt and gather anymore, but now they're able to get some of the surplus off the farm. And civilization in world history, you'll find it starts in these agricultural hearts because of these extra people who have these abilities. This is also where you start to get population growth. So now return back to Unit 2 in the demographic transition model. And this is the transition, is that the food is being planted so people can live longer. And this is going to come up again and again. The demographic transition model is going to kind of go on top of the agricultural models that we're looking at. And the demographic transition model will come up again when we look at economic models more in depth. So, recap, planting crops equals the birth of civilization. You now have some surplus. Sometimes it's a little bit, sometimes it's a lot. But regardless, it gives you those extra people who can do something. And then your surplus is then controlled by a group of people who kind of becomes your priestly class or your elite class. It allows for something called specialization. So you now have people who are able to do stuff except work on the farm. Now that you can free up people so that they can engage in measuring or basing science, like having sciences or engaging in math. This is so important. And this all is pretty much subsistence farming. And that's where you're growing food to be fed to the people of your group. You have people who are getting a surplus, but the food is being grown to be eaten by the local population. It's not that it's being grown and it's a surplus, because your priestly class and your king class, there's still individuals who are seen as part of the community, and it's not that they're having to buy the food from other people. It's just given to them. Okay, so we're going to move past the first agricultural revolution and talk about the type of agriculture that's happening. In the first agricultural revolution, it's subsistence agriculture. So people are growing food and they are consuming it. Their family is consuming it or they are consuming it. This is in contrast to another type of agriculture called commercial agriculture. And commercial agriculture starts occurring with the second and third agricultural revolutions. So we're not going to talk about commercial agriculture right away, but it's good for you to know that it exists, and that's why I keep emphasizing the term subsistence. Usually more developed countries that are considered core or that are higher up in Rostow's economic model, These are countries that engage in commercial agriculture. For subsistence agriculture, so back to First Revolution, you have two subtypes of subsistence agriculture. The first one is called extensive. So extensive subsistence agriculture means that you are using a wider area of land and you are getting a lower calorie output. Typical examples of extensive subsistence agriculture include nomadic herding, slash and burn, which is an agricultural process that you cut down places and you put nutrients back in by cutting down the trees. And I'll show you a video. In this situation, you're not able to have as many people live there because you're not getting as many calories out. It usually occurs in northern regions where it's a colder climate. Also, when you have cattle is always going to be extensive because the cattle have to graze over different areas. Intensive subsistence agriculture. This means that you have a much higher calorie output and it can support higher numbers of people. And so I actually made the little graphic again, and we still have 8 acres of land. And I know that my 8 acres, each acre is going to give me 1,000 calories. Remember, if 2,000 calories are needed to support a single person, that means that with this type of agriculture, the most people I can support in that area is 4. And usually, again, colder climates, cattle herding, they all fall under extensive subsistence. It's extensive amounts of land. That's how you need to think of it. When I go to intensive agriculture, intensive subsistence, so I'm growing it to consume it, this is where you have high calorie outputs per acre. And you have to put a lot more labor into each acre to make sure that that area stays fertile. And here I have 10,000 calories per acre. So each acre can support 5 people. And this is where you get countries that have very high population densities. Rice grows well in China. Rice grows well in India. Rice grows well in Japan. And so these are groups of people who now can grow large amounts and support a large group of people in a smaller area. We're going to watch a quick video. It's really cool. This is in northern Russia. It'll give you all the information, but pay attention because it is extensive subsistence. You have a group of people who are still engaging in a level of herding, nomadic herding, which is quite uncommon now.
Well, we now continue our series of reports from one of the most remote parts of Russia. It is Far Eastern Republic of Sakha, also known as Yakutia. Roughly the size of India, if you can imagine. It's Russia's biggest republic, but despite the vast territories, Yakutia is one of the least populated areas of the country. Just under 1 million people live there. Well, most of them are used to spending winters in extreme temperatures, which can drop to minus 70 degrees. Well, RT's Alice Hibbert is there to show us how people make their living in that part of Russia. Alice, people there enjoy very interesting traditional lifestyles. Tell us more.
Well, that's right, Anastasia. There are so many remarkable things about this republic. Its size, it's the largest in Russia, its remoteness, it's over 6 time zones away from Moscow, and its climate, it's home to the coldest inhabited place on earth, but also the number of ethnic groups that make up the tiny population here of under 1 million people. Ukrainians, Russians, Azeris, Armenians, Turks all live here together, including a number of ancient nomadic tribes, such as the Evan people. They've herded their reindeer across these lands for centuries. And RT's Leah Ferguson spent a day with them discovering just how difficult their everyday lives are, but also their struggle in trying to keep ancient traditions alive in the face of modern change.
If there were no reindeer, there'd be no Evan people. If there were no Evan, there'd be no reindeer.
The simple philosophy of this indigenous tribe. In winter, the Evan people pack up camp and resettle every 10 days or so, constantly migrating with their herd. But is it the reindeer that lead the herders, or vice versa? When reindeer run out of grazing land, they go in search of fresh pasture. Andrei says it's him that follows their every move.
I
live and move with the reindeer all year round. I grew up here in the taiga. This way of life is in my blood.
The Evan people have been natives of this land for centuries, but during the Soviet era, the tribes and their reindeer were collectivized into state farms. It was then that they developed an awareness of national identity and pride.
Well, I've just asked Andrei if he'd ever swapped this life for anything different, and he shot me a look of disbelief at that question. He said, no, never, because these reindeer are his world, and he'd never dream of abandoning them.
But this is a tough job in a challenging environment, where temperatures drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Over 1,000 reindeer roam this territory. The majority belong to the local government, which also owns the land, rich in oil and diamonds. Yet authorities pay the herders just $250 a month.
My salary is very low. It's not enough to provide for my family, and sometimes my wages don't arrive, so that's why my wife has to make fur clothes for a living.
Andrei's wife, Rima, uses the fur from reindeer legs to make boots. And she crafts traditional Evan costumes in her spare time. But her main duties are that of a yurt keeper. Organising her canvas home, cooking, sewing and tending to the needs of her family. And she's teaching her young daughter Zoya the skills of a yurt worker. But Rima's concerned about the future of Evan culture.
Young people go off to university and are tempted by the big city. They don't want to return to a nomadic way of life. So we must try our best to keep children inspired and teach them how to love and live in this environment.
But in reality, this is a primitive existence. It takes this much effort to report back to local authorities. A quick chat to friends in the city is out of the question. And if you want to eat, you have to know how to hunt. It's Rima's job to keep the wolves from the door and protect the family home. Well, it seemed like all work and no play to me, so here comes the fun bit. The herders use reindeer for transportation. Often it's a 2-hour ride to the lake to fetch ice for drinking water. And this supply runs out twice a week. The end of a long day's work, and it's a chance at last to warm up. Before supper, the Evan people bless the fire, seen as a protector of the family. For here, they're in the hands of nature. They tell me this is a hard, yet spiritual existence. Leah Ferguson, RT, in the Taiga, Republic of Yakutia.
Well, I'm now joined by Leah Ferguson. Leah, good to see you on this very chilly morning. Now, you, as we know, spent a day with the Evan people. Fascinating. What did you learn?
Well, as we were very lucky to be able to spend some time with these reindeer herders and witness their daily life firsthand. And my gosh, what a challenging lifestyle they face. They were up before dawn, chopping wood and preparing breakfast for the long day ahead. And it certainly was a long and chilly night. We stayed with Andrei and Rima in their tent, which would have traditionally been a yurt, a pyramid-type tent. But they opt now for a more modern canvas home. But it was very chilly during the night. The RT team had to huddle together to keep warm, even though Rima kept the fire stoked all night long. But Rima and Andrei say the tent is not their home. Their home extends as far as the eye can see. They live with nature, and to me, when I woke up in the morning, it looked just like Narnia. It was a captivating environment. But it certainly is a challenge. But these people say that they didn't choose this life. This life chose them. It's in their blood, and they were born to be reindeer herders.
Very briefly, Leah, what are the main challenges you think the Evan people face in these modern times?
Well, of course, the younger generation are tempted now by the big city. They go off to university, and very few of them want to come back and live that nomadic way of life. And the wages, of course, are very, very low. So they cannot own the territory, and they cannot own their own reindeer, so that puts many people off nowadays.
Fantastic. Great insight. Thanks so much, Leah. That is all we have time for this edition of Russia Close Up. Do join us in the next hour for more from the Republic of Sakha-Yakutia.
Amazing stories there of reindeer herders of the Sakha Republic. Alice Hibbert and Leah Ferguson, thank you both for...
I like this video because the Russia close-up one, because it shows you pastoral nomadism. It's a huge area. Like, geographically, you're looking at a huge expanse that is larger than most countries, that's part of Russia, and it doesn't have many people, and it's because what is grown there. The things that are grown there really aren't always for human consumption, but the reindeer, they can metabolize it differently, and so they consume the reindeer, and the population density is very low because of it. There's a huge population element occurring too, in that you have your migration, where they're talking about people going to the cities, and how the way of life is dying out. You also have how their culture is impacted by what it is that they wear, what it is that they eat. You also have kind of a little blurb about Soviet forced nationalism, where they put people out into farms and would pay them. So it's a good video because it gives you more than just the agricultural aspect, but all these other things that we've learned about already. So we're actually going to watch another video. And this video actually looks at shifting cultivation. And that's where you have farmers who are growing on plots of land, but then they have to abandon that plot of land because it loses its nutrients. Shifting cultivation is really common in tropical regions, and it's because the soil loses its nutrients very quickly. You think, oh, it's a tropical rainforest, it grows a lot of stuff, but be mindful that there's a nutrient runoff because of the rain and how quickly the decay occurs. That's biology stuff, so you'll learn more about it later on. But for what we care about is that, okay, this is another form of extensive agriculture, and it's a specialized one that occurs in tropical regions, and these people don't really put that much labor into it. You know, they expend a lot of labor clearing the forest, but then they let the fire do a lot of work, and then they plant root crops that have a lower calorie output. So we're going to watch that.
O fogo serve para queimar as folhas e aquela madeira fina para poder plantar, senão não tem que plantar assim. Se não tirar a folha e nem a madeira, só se for mecanizado.
Eles trabalham porque é a necessidade deles plantar para colher, para comer, sobrar alguma saca de algum legume para vender, e porque também não tem incentivo assim do governo para trabalhar com máquinas, terra mecanizada, aí tem que derrubar, tem que queimar. Porque se não queimar, plantar na terra crua não dá. Se a terra for crua, que nem um campo, uma juquira baixa e não for aradado, você não planta lá que não dá nada.
Farmers work at the place where the grasslands meets the secondary forest. Here, farming begins by cutting back vegetation and trees. They also leave another area alone for 5 or even more years to let it grow and recover soil fertility for future crops.
A juquira é mato fino, boina no capim, olha. E capoeira daquela altura, olha. Capoeira alta.
A farmer can't keep planting the same crop year after year because the soil would get tired.
Isso aqui que é que tira a mandioca.
A gente planta num ano, aí quando tira a mandioca, aí deixa a capoeira subir de novo. Aí com 4 anos ou 5 a gente já planta, aí bota aquele mesmo lugar e aí planta de novo. Todos os anos tem de ir mudando o local.
a gente queimado, né? A gente planta o arroz e aquela terra só vai prestar para plantar arroz só com 10 anos só de novo. Aí todo tempo a gente tem que ir derrubando e queimando, derrubando e queimando. Aí derruba e queima, fica aquela cinza, aquele bagaço velho que era da folha antes, aí vira um adubo, aquilo ali planta e dá, tudo que plantar dá. E se for uma terra já assim, de 3 anos trabalhada, era só se for mecanizada e adubada. Aí o incentivo da queima é esse, porque não tem de outra maneira para ele fazer o roçado dele, se não for derrubar e queimar.
O trabalhador rural, agricultor familiar é cumpridor de lei, ele não mexe na reserva legal. Então se ele abre os 20% do lote dele, ele vai ficar a vida inteira andando naqueles 20% do lote dele.
Desde eu pequeno, eu vi nos meus pais, nós lutávamos com isso. Lá. Desde quando me tinha de trabalhar no roçado, que nós trabalhamos desse jeito. Faz no roçado, no tempo botando fogo, faz nos aceiros botando fogo. Aí fica o garrão, vamos encorrarar, limpar tudo. Aí quando chega o inverno, aí a gente planta. Desde pequeno, de idade de 6 anos, eu tenho costume.
Aqui em Santarém, a gente tem 30 mil hectares de mandioca plantado. 30 mil hectares de mandioca plantado. Eu acho que na região, se a gente somar todos os 28 municípios do oeste do estado do Pará, a gente vai ter mais do que 100 mil hectares plantados de mandioca. Então, se você pegar 100 mil hectares hoje, você tem pelo menos, eu acredito, 100 mil famílias envolvidas nisso. Como eles não têm assistência técnica, não têm assessoria técnica, como eles não têm financiamento bancário para essa cultura, a cada 2 ou 3 anos, eles têm que, então, abrir novos 100 mil hectares. Abrir não, porque eles usam as capoeiras, né? Mas você vai ter que queimar, não tem jeito. Então você vai colocar fogo em 100 mil hectares de novo, em 3 em 3 anos.
Eu vim saindo do mercado e encontrei com uma mulher. A mulher disse, nós somos explorador da terra. Eu fui e disse, quantas tarefas a senhora põe no roçado? Ela disse, 2 tarefas. A senhora planta o quê? Planta tomate. Então a senhora não é exploradora, a senhora é sobrevivente. Exploradores são aqueles que exploram muito terra, né? Só sobrevive.
Agora que parece que a pá dela também
Okay, so class is almost over. There's only a few minutes that should be left. If you started the video as soon as you came to class, there should be about 4, 5, 6 minutes left. I'm going to have a clicker check for you. Go ahead and go into the hub. It's only going to be 3 questions. It's not super hard. Let me know if you have any questions.